The video I'm going to be reacting to today is this one. It's called All 8 States and Territories in Australia, ranked worst to best. So obviously with lists like this, they can be a little bit arbitrary based on like whoever created this video's opinion. So I'm interested to know your opinions. What do you think the best state in Australia is? What do you think the worst state? And tell me why for each of them as well. But let's check this video. I think it'll be good not just for the list, but just to actually learn more about each state. Yeah, let's check it out.
Do you love to curse, enjoy large empty swaths of extremely hot desert, and want to increase your risk of skin cancer? Well, then you might be a feral camel, in which case you're likely already in Australia. And if you're not, why haven't you moved here? With gorgeous beaches, incredible cities, great healthcare and education, and some of the most unique ecosystems and wildlife not found anywhere else on Earth, the land down under is one of the best countries to live in. But while this giant island continent country, is around the same size as the contiguous United States, it has just 1/13 the population. And over half of the 25.9 million Australians reside in just 3 cities.
But doesn't Australia have like 6 states and 2 major territories? Why don't people spread out more?
Well, Mr. Camel, because most of the country gets so hot that you'll end up looking like this guy if you spend 5 minutes outside. Unless you actually are one of the 1 million feral camels that call the outback home, you'll probably want to stick with 85% of Australians who live within 50 kilometers of the coast.
Doesn't like every state touch the ocean though? How do I know which is best?
Find out as we rank all 8 Australian states and territories from worst to best. And let's hit 5,000 likes for a video on the 10 best cities in Australia.
Tell me what you think about the results of
Number 8.
this list.
Actually, we're going to start off with a quick honorable mention. The external territories. That's right, Norfolk Island, Christmas Island, the Cocos Islands, and a few other islands that no one lives on. I didn't forget about you. Now don't get me wrong, these aren't terrible places to live and are breathtaking with plenty of endemic species and extravagant landscapes. Christmas Island's nickname is actually Australia's Galapagos due to its unique red crabs, booby birds, flying foxes, and hundreds of other animals and fauna found throughout the tropical jungle and surrounding coral reef. And the largest and most inhabitable of these islands, Norfolk Island, is home to the tallest pine trees in the world, beautiful beaches and rolling pastures, and some of the rarest birds. If you don't mind a very slow-paced lifestyle with few modern conveniences, and most things being more expensive as they have to be shipped in, the external territories might seem like paradise. But considering they all have a combined population of only around 5,000, the extremely isolated lifestyle isn't for most.
Yeah, tell me more about that. That's those places I've never considered when watching all these videos about Australia. They look very beautiful places, as does the rest of Australia, of course, but I'd be interested to know about people who have lived there, known people who have lived there. What's it actually like? 5,000 people is a very little population for such big places, but it must be like super peaceful, and yeah, I want to know more about them.
Actual number 8, Northern Territory. If you're strictly looking to rake in the dough and don't mind the lack of infrastructure or seclusion from the rest of the country, the Northern Territory might be for you. The median household income is the 3rd highest of any state or territory at 115 grand, and the median home value is the lowest at just 515 grand. Plus, there's no property tax. But remember how I said a lot of Australia is uninhabitable? Well, a huge chunk of the most uninhabitable land is here. The southern half of the territory has a climate similar to the Sahara Desert, and while Darwin and the coast is a bit more livable with tons of rainfall during the wet season, it also gets very hot and humid, and that rain often turns into cyclones and extreme flooding. So, despite accounting for 17.5% of the country's landmass, less than 250,000 residents, or 1% of Australia, actually lives in the NT. And it's the only state or territory which had a net population decrease over the past year. But the lack of people is also why many love living here. From Litchfield and Kakadu to Uluru and Watarka National Parks, the territory is home to so much stunning wide-open wilderness that you can experience all to yourself. Although you might not want to be too alone, because not only does the Northern Territory have the most saltwater crocodiles in Australia, it's also by far the most dangerous state or territory, with a violent crime rate 323% above the national average.
Why is crime so bad there? But again, like somewhere like Darwin actually seems very interesting to me. Like it can have that peaceful life. Actually, the weather seems very similar to here in Malaysia, I guess because it's closer to the equator. It's got that kind of tropical climate. climate and things like that as well. But yeah, tell me your experiences living in Darwin and in the Northern Territory, how that is it living there. It seems like a very beautiful place, like a lot of great landscape like the rest of Australia, of course, like I mentioned. But yeah, Darwin, again, a very underrated place, I think.
Number 7, South Australia. While the Northern Territory is home to some of the highest wages in the nation, South Australia has the second lowest median household income at just $98,500 and the highest unemployment rate at 4.4%. But if you're someone who prefers the simple life and community over vibrancy and wealth, the Festival State is a wonderful place to settle down. It's home to so many charming suburbs and beach towns, over 5,000 kilometers of pristine coastline, the best wine in the country, and hardly any crime. And with below average fuel, grocery, and utility costs, and a median home value of just $565,000, South Australia is actually the cheapest state. And Adelaide is the cheapest capital. Sure, Adelaide's also likely the most boring city with over 1 million residents, and a bit behind the times with supermarkets still closing at 5 p.m. on weekends, for example, but that's also by design. Adelaiders love that their home offers all of the amenities of a city, with great food, museums, parks, festivals, and a few unique attractions like the Adelaide Central Market, while still maintaining its small town charm with hardly any traffic and where everyone knows everyone. Not to mention, it's easy to navigate with no toll roads and a beautiful beach or waterfall hike being just a 20-minute drive from the city center.
Seems like every state and territory in Australia is going to have amazing landscapes, like so close to it, and that's one thing I really love about Australia. But Darwin and Adelaide, North and South, they seem like two of the most underrated places in Australia. Like, being from outside of Australia, everybody always talks about the big cities like Melbourne and Sydney, of course, but they seem like actually very livable places. You get that peaceful life, but you also are close to beautiful places also, and just have a nice life. I'm really interested to know more about people's experiences living in those cities and those
Queensland.
regions.
Queensland is Australia's most popular holiday destination, and for good reason. It's incredibly safe, has the most national parks, and with scenery as diverse as the Great Barrier Reef, Daintree Rainforest, Porcupine Gorge, and Lamington, Girrawin, Goringan, under a volcanic Blackdown Tablelands, and Great Sandy National Parks, not to mention the only Everglades ecosystem outside of Florida. It's debatably the most beautiful state. And if you prefer a more chill vacation, the Sunshine State also offers plenty of theme parks and resorts in the Gold Coast, and over 13,000 kilometers of jaw-dropping beaches. So while many used to only holiday here, that's quickly changing as more people learn of Queensland's exceptional small cities and towns. In fact, it's now the fastest growing state and one of only 2 states where over half the population doesn't live in the capital. And it's not because Brisbane sucks. It's actually often ranked as the most livable city in Australia, as it's not nearly as congested or expensive as Sydney or Melbourne, while still offering legit big city amenities and experiencing rapid growth, especially with the Olympics coming in 2032. But while Queensland's economy is the second fastest growing of any state, it still has some catching up to do, with the third lowest median household income of just $105,000. Because of this, and the fact that the housing market is booming with a median home cost of $788,000, the Sunshine State has the highest poverty rate at 13.5%.
Wow, didn't know it had so much poverty. Tell me how that manifests itself in Australia. But this list is getting kind of better and better. I can see why. Gold Coast, Brisbane look like wonderful places, but those beaches, like, I know that a lot of Australians go to Bali for their holidays. There are a lot of people go here, man. It looks like you don't even need to go to like these islands in Southeast Asia and around the world. Australia has it all on your doorstep, man. So lucky.
Number 5, Tasmania. Tasmania feels nothing like the rest of Australia. And that's because it isn't. An island located around 200 kilometers south of the mainland, the smallest state by both size and population, is home to so many otherworldly and unique landscapes and species not found anywhere else. Not to mention, it rarely ever gets hot and has the cleanest air on Earth. But not only is Tasmania an adventurer's paradise, with places like Cradle Mountain, Mount Field, and the Bay of Fires all being a short drive from pretty much anywhere on the island, it's also home to so many delightful small towns with some of the friendliest people you will ever meet. And the capital, Hobart, punches well above its weight with tons of history and beautiful architecture, great restaurants, bars, and cafes, and Mona, one of the best museums in the country. Sure, there's little in terms of bustling city life, but if you're looking to slow down and relax while being surrounded by unspoiled nature, Tasmania is perfect. Well, if you're retired or work online, because while the economy is currently the fastest growing, the median household income is still the lowest at just $89,600, and the unemployment rate is 4.3%. At least the cost of living isn't too bad, with a median home price of $691 grand, plenty of cheap high-quality produce, and low energy bills due to most of the island running on hydroelectricity.
Well, that's interesting, actually, especially with the way energy prices are increasing around the world. I'm not sure if it's the same for Australia, but definitely in the UK, here in Malaysia, energy prices are just going through the roof. But I'm glad to see Tasmania even made it on the list. I know how much it gets forgotten and left off maps and things like that. But to make it to number 5, that's impressive. But it does seem like a very unique place within Australia because it's that island. It has its own, the weather is very different from the rest of Australia as well. And for me, what people have told me, the food, the drink, all seems great, man. So
number 4,
I think that's
New
nice.
South Wales.
Australia's
Australia's oldest and most populated state. Home to Sydney, the most populated city. But while Sydney's big city amenities, multiculturalism, high quality of life, and beautiful beaches and harbors speak for themselves, this great state is so much more than just its capital. New South Wales spans over 800,000 square kilometers and is packed with 18 diverse bioregions ranging from sandy deserts to lush rainforests, rugged mountains, rolling hills, grasslands, rivers, and coast. Yeah, did you know this, and this are all within a 2-hour drive of Sydney? And if both big city life and serene scenery aren't your jam, there's also no shortage of incredible mountain or beach towns, as well as one of the best small cities in Newcastle. As a whole, New South Wales is likely the most balanced province and truly offers something for every type of lifestyle.
Then why the heck is it only number 4?
Well, because it's bloody expensive, with the highest median home cost of $1.22 million. Now, to be fair, Sydney does have an excellent and diverse economy, so wages across the state aren't bad, with a median household income of $114 grand and the lowest unemployment rate of just 2.9%. But living in Sydney also means terrible traffic, everywhere being crowded, and some of the worst nightlife for a major city.
I mean, that's the difference between like a city like Sydney and somewhere like Darwin or Adelaide is so populated. I mean, not as densely populated as like other places, like I mentioned, like in Asia and things like that, but maybe in comparison to other parts of Australia, yeah, a bit more densely populated, but it looked great. And he mentioned Newcastle there. That's the thing I'm also interested in finding out more about, is not just the big cities in these states, all these other towns and other places that people could potentially live. What's it like living in these other towns compared to the city living? Tell me about other towns in other states. But I know that the landscape and nature of Australia is diverse, but this shows it's not just diverse across the country, it's diverse between the states and territories as well.
Number 3, the Australian Capital Territory. Covering less than 2,400 square kilometers and consisting of just Canberra, its suburbs, and Namadgi National Park, it's no surprise that many Australians never even think of visiting the place. And that's honestly a shame, because sure, Canberra isn't exactly the most exciting city, seeing as it was entirely planned with the sole purpose of serving as Australia's capital. But it's still one of the most livable cities in the world. With the second lowest crime and unemployment rate in the country, the highest median household income at 150 grand, and by far the lowest poverty rate of just 5.4%, Canberrans have very little to worry about. Especially since they're close to so many gorgeous mountains with the beautiful Molonglo River running right through town. But while the ACT checks all the statistical boxes, a lot of the city just feels empty with nothing to do if you don't know any locals. The CBD is mostly fields, office buildings, and roundabouts, and while there are walkable areas with shops and restaurants, such as Braddon, Canberra feels a lot more like a collection of spread out suburbs with a few town centers than an actual city. Although, since it is the capital, there are a ton of excellent museums, galleries, and gardens. But a fair warning, Canberra is one of the few Australian cities which gets a true 4 seasons, meaning the winters actually get cold.
I mean, Canberra sounds good to me as someone who has a young family. Canberra actually seems like a perfect place to like live with a family. It doesn't seem like overly busy. Seems like a lot of nice places. It's not like too centralised within there. I said like it like seems like different joined up suburbs. So it could be a nice place to actually live. And people told me before he actually got quite good wages there as well. But he said not many people from Australia go to Canberra. Tell me if that's the case for you.
Number 2.
If you've been, do you like it? If
when
not,
you
why
think
have
of
you not been there?
Victoria, you probably only think of Melbourne, aka the true cultural capital of Australia with the best coffee on earth.
Yeah.
Seriously, prove me wrong. But while it's nearly impossible to get bored in Melbourne with its outstanding music and art scene and so many bustling alleyways filled with trendy bars, restaurants, clubs, and cafes, the Garden State is also so much more than just the hipster haven. From skiing in Falls Creek to the penguins of Phillip Island to the stunning ridges of Grampians National Park and cascading waterfalls and rainforests of Yarra Ranges and Otway National Parks, Victoria may only account for 3% of Australia's landmass, but there is no shortage of sensational scenery. Not to mention, it's by far the safest state and home to the Great Ocean Road, the most beautiful drive in the country. But 75% of Victoria does live in Melbourne for a reason. With a stellar job market, world-renowned universities, tons of history, a hip and accepting culture, an excellent public transit, nightlife, and infrastructure, it makes sense that Victoria's capital is growing faster than Sydney and will likely eclipse its population by 2050. Especially since it's cheaper. Although it is still pretty darn expensive, with the statewide median home price being 966 grand. Oh, and did I mention that Melbourne can get 4 seasons in 1 hour? Yeah, one time the temperature
Just
dropped
like
10
Scotland?
degrees Celsius in 3 minutes.
Jeez.
Now before we get to number 1,
So yeah, as people have known, and I've mentioned on previous videos, I absolutely love Melbourne. That's, for my personality, it just fits. It's just perfect. It's got everything I want in a city to live. I went there when I didn't have children, so I don't know if it's different to actually live there with children and without. I know if I was just in a couple with my wife, it would be perfect. I don't know if it's still as livable with a family. Tell me if that's true or not, but Melbourne is just a fantastic place. And you see, man, the nature of every state
make sure you leave a like and subscribe, and let me know what you think the best state or territory is.
And I did that
and why.
drive along
Without further ado,
Great Ocean Road, man.
Number
So
1,
beautiful.
Western Australia.
Oh,
Bigger
Western
doesn't
Australia?
always mean better, but Australia's largest state by total area, accounting for nearly 1/3 of the country, is also the best. Surrounded by 21,000 square kilometers of captivating coast, Western Australia is home to so much enchanting untouched wilderness. But the best thing about living here is that it's still incredibly affordable, with a median home value of just 630 grand, while also having the second highest median household income of 116 grand. Now, this is mainly due to an abundance of mining jobs, which aren't necessarily the most stable, but Perth's job market is growing and diversifying too. And speaking of Perth, it's likely the most underrated capital, with a hip music and art scene in Fremantle, excellent suburbs and beaches, solid public transit, above average nightlife and restaurants, and a relaxed, stress-free lifestyle. Outside of the state's extreme isolation, with Perth actually being the most isolated big city in the world, there's just not much wrong with Western Australia. And that's why it's our best place to live in this fine country.
Okay, so I think that's actually probably a bit of a surprise that Western Australia came first. I would have probably expected someone making a list that would have been like New South Wales or Victoria. But I'm really happy to see that. As I mentioned on a previous video, Perth, someone we're planning to come probably this year. Hopefully quite soon actually. We're still working it out. But Perth looks fantastic. The state itself just looks amazing, and yeah, I can see why that was number 1. Tell me if you agree with it being number 1. The only downside, as he mentioned there, is the isolation. But for me, I don't think that's a bad thing totally. But tell me what you think about that list. Tell me more about all the different things we mentioned there. Thanks.